that's totally fine. For those of you who missed class last week, I'm going to go over again how I set up kind of a narrative track for a 360 experience. And all we're doing in this experience, just to show you right here as a demo, is we have these little buttons in our canvas. So to test, we're just going to click on them. But if this was in Oculus Quest or any other VR application, you'd actually be able to look at those buttons and it would kind of do a little load and then activate, right? So just for testing purposes, we click them, right? We go from one to the next, to the next, and it restarts the experience, right? So that's all we're making right now for our demo. What you create is up to you. Just looking for custom landscapes, custom terrain, as well as using ProBuilder to build some type of structure around your setting. So I did a castle. It's pretty easy to do something like that. But that's up to you, what you want to create. You know, take us on a journey of whatever your vision is. And just simple, you know, having 3 or 4 nodes is totally fine, just to kind of give us a brief exploration and maybe talk about it as you go through it. I'm going to show you guys how I set this up again from last class, just from start to finish, so you have it. I will not be going through terrain creation and everything else, just because we've already done that. But I will show you exactly how I set up these world space canvases and their buttons to guide the user through the experience. Now, one of the things with Unity is your camera, your main camera, if you have a VR headset connected to your computer, it will become a VR camera, even though it looks like a regular camera. If you have like an Oculus Rift or Quest connected to the computer and you have VR mode enabled in Unity, that camera will actually become the VR camera and you can start looking around. So from that, you know, we can basically deduce that, okay, where's our user's path, right? There's where the head level would be on the user, and we're just guiding them through this little territory, whatever that is, right? And they'll just be gazing at these buttons, and we're going to try to tell a story as they go through here, depending on what that is, right? Now, with these buttons, you can add things, whatever you want, pretty much. I mean, we're triggering animations of the main character, but you could have, you know, voiceovers, you could have music cues, you could have other animations that play, things of that nature when this collider kind of moves around the scene. There's a lot you can do just from having those button generations, and I want you to get comfortable with playing with that because, you know, half the battle of Unity is kind of setting up those triggers to do different things, and then it gets more advanced from there. This is kind of the base level of game creation, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip these buttons out of the scene for now and show you exactly how I set this up. But just from a high level, you'll notice that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons in my scene. So I've got button 1, button 2, button 3, and a restart button. And all of these buttons are essentially, they're labeled button, but they're canvases holding a button inside of them. So if you look at them, you go to button 01, it's actually a world space canvas, right? And inside that canvas, it's holding a button. I just have these blue buttons to represent the button, right? So we've got 4 world space canvases sitting in our scene with buttons on them, okay? And what I'm going to supply to you guys once we get this part of the project done is a gaze raycast script that you just attach to your camera that essentially lets you look at any of these buttons and press it with a gaze, which is like a long, like you set how many seconds you want the user to look at it, and it does a little loading thing and then activates the button. So essentially the same premise, just another way of activating those buttons. So pretty basic, but I think this is kind of where you need to start in terms of creating these VR experiences, and then we can get more funner and crazier from there, right? Okay, so again, just to reiterate, I've got 4 world space canvases in my scene, and what I'm doing in each of these is I have 3 of them turned off, and as this one's activated, if we look at our canvas here, let me go ahead and make sure that it's not set to maximize. If we just take a look at our hierarchy here, what's happening is as I click on these buttons, so button 1 for instance, as I click on it, it's turning itself off and it's activating button 2. When I click on button 2, it's turning itself off and activating button 3. When I click button 3, it's turning itself off and activating the restart button, which is essentially button 4. When I click that, same thing, we're just looping back to the beginning. So we're basically creating this mini game loop just with clickable buttons just to kind of traverse the user through the scene, right? If you guys went down to the VR gallery show and some of the experiences that were on the wall, it was essentially the same kind of thing. They kind of guided you through this vision of the future that they created. And so you guys are essentially doing the exact same thing they're doing. But I'll get in a little more depth today on the buttons themselves too, on how to stylize those and make them look cooler than just, you know, a basic blue button with some boring text, right? We can get into that, and we'll go through this whole process of guiding the user through the scene. Okay? And again, I'm recording this, so this should help you out a lot. Now, everything else I created in this scene, just to go over that really quickly, this was basically just a terrain that I created in here that I did some painting and texture mapping on. And I also imported the standard assets environment folder, which lets me put these little trees and stuff around my terrain. So I've got a base to work from, and then from there, I used ProBuilder to make these little walls you see, right? This was just ProBuilder objects with a castle texture I applied to them. This is the floor, all that kind of stuff. And then just to dress it up, I added some little particle effects and things of that nature I kind of put in the little stacks around here just to make it interesting, right? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and take these buttons out of my scene. Actually, before I take them out, let me take these other three out. If we take a look at what's happening, let's just look at button number 1 really quickly. In here, now just to reiterate, you know, Unity has a lot of power built into the engine itself without having to go as far as coding, right? But when you do start creating codes and scripts, you're going to be accessing them the same way as I'm doing here with the on-click events, especially if they're buttons or, you know, triggers that you look at within your scene. Here, all I have is a button in my scene, and on its on-click events, which are inherent to any button you create in Unity, I'm just accessing different sections of my scene. So I'm saying, hey, I'm going to access my main camera. I'm going to play an animation on that camera. I'm also going to turn off this button and turn on this button, right? So pretty simple in terms of what's happening. But we'll get into a deep dive into that once we get these back in here. And again, if this is review for anybody, just, you know, keep working on your projects. But for those who missed, this should help you out immensely. Okay. All right. So, you know, the purpose of our project is basically to create some type of scene, and the design is totally up to you what you want to make. But I want to be pulled through that scene. Okay. So using a variety of these little button nodes, I want to be able to animate my camera or my character through the scene and feel like I'm being taken on some journey, albeit a really small, short journey, just something to kind of immerse the user in this experience, right? We're not getting any gameplay elements or anything like that. We're having just subtle, interactive buttons that are going to kind of guide us through the scene, okay? On our next project, we'll get into some interactive stuff, and we'll just slowly start kind of iterating that into our whole pipeline. But I think this is pretty good as a high level, just get you, you know, off making your first narrative experience, right? Okay, so with my scene, so all I did in this scene, again, was I just took a terrain and sculpted it just with normal terrain tools. And once I was done with that, I then started building this little area in ProBuilder. And then once I was happy with my design and it looked good, and I did, you know, just kind of tested it out with play mode and said, all right, that looks great. This is where I want to start. I placed my start camera, which is just my main camera. I placed that in the position I want for my scene to start, right? So I did it kind of right there, probably where eye level would be. Usually I like to put it about 2.5 meters high off the ground, which is about 6 feet off the ground. Sounds pretty good in terms of the height. And then from there, that's going to make the user feel like they're normal, you know, height, like an actual human. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and animate the camera. So what I did at first was place the camera where I wanted it in my scene. This is kind of my start position, right? And then you're going to notice inside, if I go ahead and open up the animator window, which is under general, or is it animation, you get this animator tab, right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete the previous animations I had, but you'll see in here, this camera that I had created, I had 4 different animations for it. I had an idle and 3 other camera movements, right? If I play those, you can kind of see what my camera does, right? It just kind of flies through the scene. I just keyframed that. Each of these were just keyframed animations, 1, 2, and 3. We'll go ahead and do it again just to show you how to set it up. So what I'm going to do right now is bring this camera back to its idle position, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the animations that the camera had in Unity. we'll recreate those. And the camera itself, it had an animator on it. I'm going to go ahead and remove the animator, okay? So you'll notice when I do that, and this is whenever you don't have an animator applied to any object in Unity, it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to add an animator? And it'll only ask you that if you have this animation window open. Whoops, this little tab right here. And I usually like to dock it right below my play space so I can see my hierarchy on the left, my scene above it, and the animation window below. That's just going to give you that timeline, always accessible. You want to dock it because if you don't and you start clicking on objects, your Unity's going to pop up over it and it's going to go behind the editor and it's just like a problem. So you always want to make sure like any of these windows that you're using to accomplish different tasks, you're going to want to go ahead and dock them in the scene. Now if you had a dual monitor setup, that's a different story. You could throw them off on the other monitor, things like that. But for this is just kind of how you have to set it up. All right. So again, to start, so I've got my camera in its start position and we want to take our user through this level, right? Maybe just a couple different pause points. We're just going to fly the camera through just to kind of send the user on an experience. But to do so, the first thing we need to do is we need to animate the camera through our level and give the camera some animations that we can call upon with buttons, okay? So to do that, I have my camera selected, just main camera, right? And you'll see on my camera, it says with the animation window open, to begin animating main camera, create an animator and an animation clip. Now I could just do that by adding components to the camera and create those, or I can auto do it by clicking the create button. Just kind of helps you out. So I'm going to click create, and with create selected, I'm going to go ahead in my assets folder. I'm just going to make a new folder in there, and we're going to call it camera animations. Okay, and create. And inside camera animations, my first animation is going to be camera idle. So I'm just going to write camera idle. And I'm going to save it. So you'll see the minute I do that, it now gives me a timeline for my camera, an empty timeline. And you'll see over here under animation, it says camera idle, right? I can add other properties to it if I need to. Okay. So what we need to do now is set up our first animation for this camera, which is an idle animation. So an idle animation is an animation that just idles. It doesn't do anything. It just literally sits there and just ping pongs back between two frames doing nothing, right? The reason we do that is just to give it a state so we can always rest in that state, even though the state's doing nothing. It kind of gives us like a blank space to work from, right? So with the camera idle state there, and it's also good too if you're keyframing between different animations, having an idle animation state will allow you to tween back to that if you're using animation transitions, which we will be using, okay? So with my camera idle state, to set the idle animation, all I have to do is click my record state, and I just have to move this camera just a little bit just to make that first frame, and I'm going to move it just a little bit and also just give it a slight rotation, so I get movement and rotation in my first frame. Now with those already keyframed right there, and it'll auto keyframe those. If you're in record mode, it'll add those auto keyframes for you. I'm just going to copy those and paste them down the keyframe. So I'm going to Control C, just go down my timeline here, and just at a second, I'm just going to Control V. So this animation does nothing. It just literally just plays back and forth between those two doing absolutely nothing, right? And we can test that because we have an animator attached to our camera. So if I go out of record mode here and stop this animation, and if I click on my camera's animator, which is right here, you'll see it's already set up camera idle for us, right, with the camera idle animation that I have set up. So if I go back to my scene and I play, it'll play the camera idle, which does nothing, right? That's exactly what we want. We want the camera just to sit there doing nothing. If we look at our animator, which is this little sub window right here, we can see on entry it came in, it goes to camera idle, and it just sits there and plays it over and over and over again. It's exactly what we want, right? You need to give it that idle state to start from. Now what we're going to do is, now that we have our idle state or our idle animation, we're going to create 3 other animations. I think 3 is a good number, just to kind of guide us through this little land, okay? So I'm going to start with camera animation 1, which will probably take me up to this little plane right here. And then camera animation 2, I guess I'll just kind of go around this tree, maybe up to this little knoll right here. And then from camera animation 2, I'll do camera animation 3, which will end up probably over on this little cliff right here. Okay, just kind of take us a short little journey through this little bitty level that we created, right? So to do that, I need to create those camera animations, right? So we've already created camera idle on our camera, but now what I need to do is I need to create, I need to create 2 other animations. So if you look at the camera with the camera selected, we have the animator attached. It's set to camera idle. If I go ahead and click this little drop down right here on the side, you can see it shows what other animations are attached to this particular animation. So we don't have any, we just have camera idle, but we need to make other ones, right? So those other animations are going to be camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3, just we'll call them that respectively, just so we have some type of reference to go from, and then we will implement them into the whole project, right? So I'm going to go down to create new clip. It's going to give me another blank timeline. I'm going to call this one, now we're in our camera animations folder, I'm going to call this camera anim 01, right? I'll just call them all that. Say save. So see, now I have another blank timeline, and I can switch between both. I can switch between camera idle and camera anim 01, right? If I go to camera idle, I'm going to go ahead and copy, and see those initial start frames I had, and in camera anim 02, because I want to animate from that position, I'm going to paste those initial keyframes in. And then I'm going to turn my record mode on, and at about 1 second, I'm just going to go ahead and move this camera just a little bit up into my scene right about there. Okay. Maybe I do a little turn too to get some rotation information in there, right? So you'll see I do a little tween, right? If I play it, just comes to that spot, right? Now that might be that might be going a little too fast, but we can easily fix that in our timeline. If you just scrub your timeline or scroll it with your scroll wheel, you can make it smaller or bigger. I'm just going to drag those frames out to like, we'll go 2 seconds, make it a little bit slower. So now if I play it in my preview, oh, hold on a second. Sorry, if I play it in my preview down here, see, it kind of takes us to where we need to go. There we go. Right? Now, anytime you create an animation in Unity, it's always defaulted as a looping animation. So you'll notice I'm playing this animation right now. And if we look at the playhead in my timeline down here, the animation clip, it's just looping, right? If we don't want that to happen, we need to specifically tell Unity on that particular animation, hey, don't loop this clip, right? And in order to do that, we need to go into our animations that we've created and specifically click that option off. You'll see by default, it's set to looping, but down here in my camera animations folder that we set up for these animations, we've got camera idle, which is, the idle's fine to loop because it goes nowhere, right? So they can just loop all day. But the camera anim 01, where we move to that position, you'll see it says loop time and it's checked. I don't want it to loop, I just want it to go there and stop, right? So if I check loop time, uncheck it, and now I play it in here, click on my camera, you'll see, oh, let me go to camera M01. Oh, well, I'm sorry, in the preview it loops, but in the actual animator, if we were to play our scene, so if I go to my animator, and in here we've got camera idle, which automatically loops. But if we make a transition to camera anim 01, it'll just play it once. So if we, to test that, if we play our scene, click on the animator, you'll see it just goes and it stops, right? It doesn't keep looping how the other one was, right? You can test that again just by turning it off, pressing play, go to the animator, goes right to there and it stops, right? We want each of our animations to do that. If I actually look at my scene, you'll see it plays my idle, then it goes through, and it stops, right? It's exactly what we want. Now, if that animation was unchecked to loop time and I press play, it will keep bouncing back, right? So you need to make sure that those animations that you create are set to, loop time is set to unchecked, right? So I'm going to go in here and uncheck that. And that'll just stop it from kind of, looping that animation, okay? So all I'm going to do now is just duplicate the same sequence I did for camera animation 01, but on each of these frames that I create, I'm going to copy these last frames, these last keyframes, and use them as the starting frame for the following animation, right? So it has a start and an end point that always kind of matches up in each of the animations we do, right? So for example, if I go ahead and I copy these guys, Command C, and then under my clip here, just go to my, make sure I'm on camera, oops. Click on my main camera, there we go, okay. So I'm gonna copy those, oh, let's go to Camera Anim 01. I'll copy these last frames, and I'm gonna create a new clip. I'm gonna call this Camera Anim 02. Then on this, I'm just going to paste in the start frames what was the end frames of my last frame. You can see where I put it, right? I put it right over there. Okay? So from this particular animation, on the course of 2 seconds, we're just going to do another little animation just taking the character forward through the scene, right? So I'm going to go to record mode, and then I'm going to bring my playhead. We'll just go, I think we used 2 seconds last time, which is pretty good. We'll go to 2 seconds. And from here, I'm just going to move my camera through my scene. Maybe do a little rotation where it's looking out to where this cliff is. Do something like that. Try to straighten it out a little bit. There we go. All right, move my camera up. Just make sure it's not too close to the ground. Down a little bit like that. Okay. And you can refine that animation too on its path. So if I play that animation, we kind of see what the camera does when it tweens, right? It's probably going to go beeline right to that spot, does a little loop around. I might have it arc a little bit, so I could just at this point say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to move this camera a little bit over here. Maybe it does a little look out here. And it turns around, right? We can play that. All right, great. A little quick, I think, in terms of the timing of things, so it's easy to fix. I'll just take these keyframes out to make it a little bit slower. It is a little bit long. That's pretty easy to do. I can just stretch my timeline out. I can actually grab these frames and just pull them out to make it take a little bit longer if I want. So I can say, you know what, let's make that 5 seconds instead of 2. All right, play that. Oh, let's make our transition in our animator. So in here, we've got camera idle that starts, goes to camera anim 01, and then it's going to make a transition to camera anim 02. This is the new one we just made, right? If I come in here, let's go ahead and make camera anim 01 a little bit longer as well. And again, you can just drag these out just to make them a little bit longer. Okay, so if we play this, it should transition from all 3. We were starting, and we have our first one. Should go right into the second one. Turns, and we're looking out, right? Now, the problem is that last animation is set to loops. You can see I didn't change it, so it just keeps looping it, right? But if we wanted to fix that, obviously we just come into camera anim 02 and just uncheck loop time. Okay, so now if we play it, we should have a complete animation that plays, starts, goes to camera anim 01, comes around, stops at camera anim 02. Okay. All right. Now we're just rinse and repeating right now. So all I'm going to do is in my scene with my main camera selected, I'm just going to go ahead and make camera anim 03. So I'm going to go create new clip. And in here, I'm just going to do camera anim 03. And that's just my naming convention. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just calling it that just for the sake of what we're doing. I'm going to say save. You see it added another one down here. I've got camera anim 02, now 03. If I click on 02, I'm going to go ahead and copy that last frame of the animation and use it as my start frame on camera anim 03. So I'm going to Command C. Then I'm going to go to camera anim 03. And on here, I'm going to go Command V. All right, so we have that start frame. And then with the camera selected, let's just make sure, well, are we at the start? Hold on. Oh, let's go to camera anim 03. There we go. All right, so there we go. Just stretch this out a little bit. Okay, so we're going to take him from that last frame, probably right over to this cliff right here, right? So in here, I'm just going to click record mode, move my playhead down my scene a little bit, and I'll just move my camera right over to the edge right here. We'll put them right on the edge of that cliff. Put them right there. Maybe it is a little. As he's coming down, he does a little swerve move or something. And does a little look out to there, and then looks back. All right. Let's go to those last frames. Right here, we'll just do a little. There we go, something like that. Maybe it looks down a little bit. Go.
Is there a trick to getting the camera to move with the terrain and not go into it? Like you want to put a glider on it?
When we get into like actual player controllers, then yeah. But for now, we're just hand animating it right now. Yeah. What you could do is put a capsule collider on your terrain and just look where the bottom of it is, so it doesn't you know, it's always at the same height kind of thing. I'm just kind of eyeballing it right now. This should be totally fine. Okay, so we got that. So let's play that. Oh, we got to set our animator up. So come in here, and I'm going to make a transition to camera Anim 03. Here we should have a full complete transition. So it starts, goes to the first spot, goes to the second spot, and continues down to the third. Great. All right. And again, that last animation was set to loop. So I'm going to uncheck that so it doesn't loop. So if we test it, we should have 3 different camera effects. We have one that sends us through. 2. Great. And we stop. All right. Maybe we should put something cool at the end for it to see or something. Okay. Okay, so what we need to do now is we have our different camera transitions, right? We've got, if I go to main camera here. We've got our idle. We've got camera Anim 01, camera Anim 02, and camera Anim 03. Now, if we look at the animator for our camera, and you can always access this little tree by, if you have your camera selected and you have an animator on it, you can just click this, and that'll open up the same thing. It'll open up this animator window. Okay, so we're on the animator window right now. You'll see in here we have, okay, what this means is on entry, what happens, right? Think of this as like a director. It's kind of telling the object through specific animations how you want it to act, right? So we're saying, hey, on entry, right, play camera idle, which was our kind of ping-ponging idling effect, right? From idle, I want you to transition over to camera Anim 01. From camera Anim 01, I want you to transition to camera Anim 02. And from camera Anim 02, I want you to transition to camera Anim 03. And that's what we'll end up. Now, what we can do is make another transition back to idle, and that'll be our reset. Okay, so if we want to do a little loop where we constantly give the user the option to kind of go through the steps and then start back over at the beginning, we can create a little loop there. So we can say, hey, at camera Anim 03, when you're done, let's race back to camera idle, right? I'll do a quick transition back there, right? So we're kind of like setting that up. Now, when you look at the animator, just some things to take note. So these little boxes right here, these coincide with the animation or the motion that you've created, right? So anytime you create one, when you have an object and you set up an animator and you create animations, they're going to give you these little boxes inside the animator to kind of control. And if they don't, you can always just drag your animation into there too to create another one if you need to. But we don't need to do that because if you have them set up right, it'll automatically put them in there. But by chance, if you're importing animations on a character or something else, you can drag them into the animator and set them up that way. Okay, now with these set up, just a couple things to note. So these boxes right here are your animations, right? You'll notice that the orange one, the reason it's orange is because this is our default state. So anytime you create an animator for any object in Unity, it needs some type of default animation to reference, right, or to go to from entry. Entry's got to go somewhere, right? Well, where's it going to go? It's going to go to our default animation. At any time, if you ever need to change that default animation, you can right-click on another animation and say set as default state. And that'll make that one the default animation, right? But we want camera idle to be our default, so I'm going to set that one as our default. Okay? So when it starts, camera starts, animation starts, goes to camera idle. From there, if we look at these little lines with the arrows in them, those are our transitions, right? Those are going to take us to the different animations. Now, two things to look at in here. So we've got, you understand we've got our animations, right? Or these little boxes right here, right? But these little arrows that show us the transitions from which animation goes to which animation, they kind of have to do with how you tween from animation to animation, as well as the blend states. So if I look at this animation, so let's start with camera idle, right? Into camera anim 01, you'll see in here that it has camera idle, and it goes into camera anim 01. This little state right here, these little things are just how well you blend that animation into the other one. Doesn't really matter too much with what we're doing with this particular animation, except for at the very end where camera anim 03 blends to idle. Right now we kind of have this big blend, which means it's going to race that camera back to camera idle as fast as it can, or try to tween it to that spot. We could close the gap on that so that the tween is very, very, very subtle. So it literally just pops back, right? So you don't really have a blend. It just kind of snaps back in place, right? Kind of like curves, but it does it like a graph, kind of the way it does it, but like a blend in between the two. But it basically just shows, you know, what is it blending, what animations is it blending between.
How did you bring up that?
Which one?
The timing graph right there?
If you just click on the transitions,
Ah,
it shows them. Yep. Okay, so that's how you like blend between two animations. But if you need to control animations, something to take note of is on each of these animations, when I click the transition element, these little arrows right here, you're going to notice this little option that says has exit time. And it's by default, it's always checked in Unity. Okay, now what that means is when this animation plays, if has exit time is checked, that means go to the next animation. It means it has exit time. It will go to the next one. It will exit out of that animation and it'll play the next one. If you uncheck those, it'll just stop on that animation. Okay, so anytime you have a graph like this and you just want it to stop, even if it's idled or whatever, you want to make sure it's stopped, you want to uncheck has exit time. Now, because we're controlling these animations, we want to make sure that they stop on every single animation and don't play through. So we're going to go through each one of these transitions, and we're going to say, hey, we don't want you to continue. But you're going to notice it's going to give you this little error down here when it says that. So let me just go ahead and click these really quickly. Let's turn them all off. So you'll see if I go back to the first one here, it says, whoa, wait a second. Transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valid. So it's saying, no, to work, you either need to have that checked or you need to give me some type of condition to let me know that, okay, we're going to stop, right? Without that checked, it doesn't know what to do. And that's what this little error means right here. So we need to create a condition, or basically like think of it as like a word to give this thing to say, no, stop. Like the magic word we're going to give each one of these, okay? So to set that up, we need to create what's called a parameter. And this, gets a little involved, but this is really just basic stuff in Unity. And once you do it a couple hundred times, you'll get it, no problem. All right. So in here, with its conditions, it says the list is empty. Okay, what this coincides to is this little area up here. We've got layers and parameters. We don't need to worry about layers right now. This is more for character animation if you're animating layers on characters. So if a character was running and shooting or punching and running or whatever, you could have top layer, bottom layer, and like mix them up, right? You could do mixes of animations or mix animation trees and stuff. We don't need to worry about that with what we're doing with the cameras right now because we're just doing straight animation plays. So we don't need to worry about layers. We'll get into layers later. Parameters is important. So parameters are the words, right, or the keywords, the magic words we give this animator to say, no, stop on these animations. So each one has to have basically a different word to kind of coincide with what we're doing, right? So from camera idle to camera 01, we can just call that one camera 01. Right? That means play camera anim 01 when camera 01 the word is selected, right? But to do that, we need to create that parameter, which is that word, in the list. So say it says list is empty, we need to create one, right? So to do that, inside parameters, we have this little drop down. And in here we've got float, integer, boolean, and trigger. Okay, these top three we don't need to worry about. These are more for coding instances, things like numeric values. Whereas the bottom, trigger, this is a word, right? This would be what's called a string. And when you get in further into coding, you're going to know the difference between integers and strings. String is always a word. Okay, if you ever hear the phrase like, "Hey, what's the string?" The string is the word. Okay, just think of it as a word. There's no numeric values or anything associated with it. It's just a word, right? So, and that word could be a combination of letters and numbers. Okay, so we're going to give this a string, and that's under trigger. So we're going to say trigger, trigger right here, right? So the first one, I'm going to call camera, or I can just do cam01, right? There's my first one. Second one right here, cam02, right? I go back up to trigger and make another one. I'll call this one cam03. I'm going to make one more. I'm going to call this one reset. Okay, and that'll be the last one I look at. That'll bring me back to the beginning, right? So what these are basically little checkboxes that when they're activated play the specific animations. But we need to link these words or these string values to these individual transitions, right? So if I click on the first transition here from camera idle to camera anim 01, you're going to see it gives me that error. It says transition needs at least one condition or an exit time to be valued. If I open the list now, it says list is empty, but I click plus, it'll give me a drop down now, and I can add in one of those four that I created, cam01, cam02, cam03, or reset. So for this first transition, obviously it's going to be cam01, right? Now that error's gone, and it says, oh, okay, all right, so we're not going to exit unless we get cam01, then we'll play through, right? Unless we're fed this value, we won't go, right? And do the same thing on the next transition. I'm going to say plus. I'll make this cam02. The next one, camera M03, same thing. I'm going to make that cam03. The next one, the final one, I'm just going to make a reset because we're going from the last animation to back to the idle. So we'll call that one reset. All right? No, you don't need to because we're going to the idle. And it's just going to sit there. So it's like the start. So we're good. Default transitions don't have, they always just go to the default. There's no like value associated with it, right? Okay, so on these we've got, again, camera anim 01, so cam01, cam02, cam03, and reset, right? And what that means is when I tell Unity play cam01 or play cam02 or play cam03, it's going to play forward to this next animation based on those text values I gave it, right? So now what we need to do is that's already set up. That's all good to go. It's pretty easy to set up that structure. It takes a little bit getting used to, but once you've got it, you know, this video is here for reference, so if you guys need to refer back to this to do so, super easy. Once you get a handle on the animator, there's so much you can do in Unity. Like, you can really go nuts with animations and all kinds of stuff. And the cool thing is, every single thing that you create in Unity, you know, can have an animator associated with it. And you can animate anything on the character, not just like its positional data or where it's at, but if it's a particle, you can change all the effects inside the particle, all the values, all that kind of stuff. You can animate everything. So there's really a lot that you can add to this. But what we're going to do now is create buttons inside the scene to access those particular states, right? And then we're going to say, hey, play those animations on the main camera when these buttons are clicked, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do, I can actually close my animator now because we've got our animations and what they do. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that. Just give myself a little more real estate here as I'm working. Okay, so now the next part of the equation is actually create buttons that we can click to play those animations. We've got the animation set up. We've set up the different transitions, and we have our trigger values associated with those transitions. Now it's a matter of creating buttons to talk to the camera saying, hey, play these animations when I give you these values, okay? So to do that, very easily in our scene, and I'll go over exactly how to set these up, but we need to create what's called UI buttons, or user interface buttons, inside our scene that we can click on and activate to make these things happen. And to do so, we're going to first go to Game Object, UI, Button, okay? Now, by default, when you create a UI, it's going to give you this massive, massive canvas in your scene, right? Looks something like that. It's bigger than your level, bigger than everything, and it'll have a little button associated with it. And you can see it on your hierarchy. You'll see it has a canvas and a button, okay? Now, in order for this to work, especially for VR, we need to make our canvas, bless you, we need to make our canvas sit inside our world and not be overlaid. Because the way it's currently set up is when it creates a canvas and a button, if I go ahead and look at my game view, you can see it's set to overlay. So you can see how that button's just overlaid over my camera here. It'll always be rendered kind of like if you had a game with like a health bar or stats or like, you know, coins you've collected or whatever, how it sits over your game. That's essentially the default state of a UI. But we need to fix that to say, no, these buttons, like these aren't like mobile buttons for a game, you know, mobile game or whatever. These are buttons that we're actually going to look at in our scene. They're actual objects that sit in the world space coordinates of our scene. So to do that, we need to change, first of all, the setup of this canvas as well as the button and resize it to fit inside our little scene here. So to do that, with my canvas selected, I'm going to click on my canvas, and you'll see on the render mode settings under canvas, it says screen space overlay. I'm going to change that to world space. Okay. Now, when you change it to world space, the first thing it's going to do is say a world space canvas with no specified event camera may not register UI events correctly. Well, that's important, especially if we're going to be doing VR and use our camera as our raycast down the road. So we need to associate that. It's not super important if you're not using a raycast from your camera, but we are, and there's a script we're going to be putting on it, so we're going to have to use that. But to fix that, we're going to associate our camera, and all you have to do is just drag the camera down into there to reference it. So we've got a world space canvas with the main camera selected. Okay. Now, when you change that to world space, the cool thing is if it's not world space, you can't really change the size of the camera. If I go back to overlay, I can't really change, not the camera, the UI. I can't really change the size of the UI when it's set to overlay. It's kind of a preset size, right? But the minute I change it to world space, I can now shrink the size of my canvas to something that'll fit inside my level. And anytime you're creating UI elements that are going to sit inside your level or be a label on something or whatever, if it's UI, you never want to mess with the UI elements inside your canvas. You want to scale the canvas and then scale the objects up inside the canvas, but not have them move off. Like, you don't want to start doing this just as a thing. You don't want to start like sizing the buttons and then moving them around, right, and doing things like this outside the canvas. Like, you don't want to start disassociating your UI elements from that world space canvas. To keep it clean, you want to size your canvas around your UI button and then size the canvas down. Now, what I mean by that is if we look up at our size tools right here, we've got move, rotate, scale, and then we have this rect scale, okay? This rect scale will actually change the XY scale of the UI element instead of changing its actual physical scale. And it does it really nicely on a certain axis, right? So if I go to my canvas right here and I have my rect scale or rect tool clicked right here, I can go to the edge of my UI right here and shrink it down. See, it actually changes the size of the canvas. Does that, right? And even though it's pushing that button outside, that's fine. We can move our button back to our canvas. Now, the one thing you want to do is if that happens, if your button gets pushed outside your canvas, to make it easy, just go up to your positional data. We always want to keep our Z position at 0. That'll make sure that our UI element is not away from the canvas. You'll see if I move this, right? See how that position data changes, right? We want to make sure that's always flat on our canvas at 0, right? Now, to bring this UI button back to like the center of our canvas, I could just literally go 0 and 0, and that'll pop that button right back to our canvas. And the name of the game here is we're literally just sizing this canvas around the size of our button. So I'm going to go, I'll just go to about right there, and then with my button kind of centered in my canvas, I can come in here and just resize my button to kind of fill up that canvas, right? Again, I'm using the same rect tool for that as well. So if we look at our button is zeroed out in our canvas, and our canvas is scaled down to the size of our button. Now inside of our button, the button is just this kind of white area right here, but inside our button we have text. We can also change the text value, and we can do that just by like the font size. We can come in here and make our font bigger or smaller, depending on what we want. We can also change the font if we have other fonts, but for now I'll just make it bold. There we go. All right. Okay. Now, if I want to move this button around, right? Oh, let's call this one button 01. That's in my text right here. I'll just go to button, call it button 01, right? Perfect, right? Maybe I'll just make it a little bit smaller. All right, great. Okay, now if I want to move this button around in my scene, I'm going to do it by moving the canvas. Now, you don't have to have one canvas for every single UI element in your scene. You can have multiple canvases. You can have as many as you want, actually. For VR, whenever you're using UI elements inside your scene, and this could be anything like if you ran up to a computer monitor in VR and it had stuff on the screen that you wanted to tap and select, you would use a UI and stick it on top of the screen and then be able to like touch those things that way, right? Or if it was a gun, you're holding a gun in VR, a blaster or laser blaster or whatever, and you had a counter of the ammo on the side of the blaster, right, that you could look at to see how much ammo you have. You would be putting that UI element literally stuck to that object, right? So think about it in terms of that. They're almost like little stickers in a way that you can put around your scene, or labels that are floating in your scene. Now, to move them around in your scene, now that I have this canvas set up and the button's pretty much the size of the canvas or close to it, I can move this around like an object. Now this is by the canvas, right? So I'm just doing it by my canvas, and I'm moving it to where I want in my scene. Now it's pretty big, so I'm just gonna scale it down. And with the canvas selected, I can rotate that object, put it where I want.
Can you put it in an empty object?
You can, as long as it's in a canvas though. It's gotta always be in a canvas. But I'm just gonna scale it, put it where I want. So we'll say, you know what, first button's gonna be right there. Now, even though it's called canvas, I'm gonna rename it so I know what I'm dealing with, from canvas to button 01, right? And again, inside there, even though it's called button 01, it is a canvas, or you could call that button 01 canvas, right? Just to make so we know what we're dealing with, right? And inside there we have our button. The button has its text, right? So there's our first little button. And all we're going to do is just replicate this button and change the text on it to be our various buttons that we can look at. So I'm going to duplicate it, just Command D, duplicate this in my scene.
Do you need to create a separate canvas per button or no?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah. If you want to do world space ones, yeah. They all need to be like on their own special ones.
Okay.
Okay, so in here I'm just going to put button 02 probably over here. Right, maybe I'll raise it up a little bit. I'll put it right on that tree, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and name that button 02. So we'll call that button 02. Right. And then I'll just duplicate this canvas to be button 03. Down a little bit. This one I'll just call it button 03 canvas. And we'll change the text on this guy to button 03. All right. One more, that'll be our reset button. That'll sit out in space. Now the reason you also want to keep them in canvases is right now I just have some pretty basic button stuff happening. Like it's just a white button with some black text, right? It's nothing crazy. This is pretty much like the most default you can get, right? But if I wanted to bring in, let's say, my own artwork for those buttons, and maybe even some other sprites and things to add to this button and have those animate, you want to animate them inside the canvas, because then they'll always stay in those world space coordinates, which is your canvas. That's essentially a 2D game object, right? It's like a holder for all your UI stuff. So if you wanted it to be more of like a pulsating kind of node that has energy that flies off of it or whatever, or even like a particle effect in 2D, you want to keep those in their individual world spaces, right? And then that makes sure that they'll animate in their own little realm too, right? So this last one, we're going to call this reset canvas. And after we get the functionality of these going, we'll go ahead and style them up a little bit. Reset canvas. Okay, and then in here, let's go to the text and change that to reset. Okay. So we've got a variety of different animation or different buttons here. We've got button 01, button 02, button 03, reset. We just play our scene really quickly. Let's just take a look at their position.
There's the text window on the inspector. I click on the button. Oh, there.
It's inside the
I
button.
see.
Yeah. And typically in the hierarchy of things in UI is whatever's nested inside it shows above it. So like the text, even though it's inside the button, it renders above it. So whatever's like nested inside the object will show above the object in terms of how it displays.
Yeah, I was just wondering why it didn't, like, 'cause I had the button selected, but it didn't have it in the inspector, which I was like, why would it do that? But I guess because it's within the hierarchy of the button.
Yeah, totally. All right. So right now, if we play, we see where our buttons are in our scene. Just kind of looking down the view of our scene, we've got our 4 buttons there. The reset's probably behind that wall. And our animation stop, which is fine because in our animator on our camera, we have those stops, right? Making sure that these are all paused. So it shouldn't do anything right now. But what I want to do is make it do something, right? So when button 01 is pressed, right? So I'm going to go ahead and first go up to button 01. We'll do our initial interactions. I'm going to open up all these canvases, and I've got button 01. In here on this button, if we come down to our actions or our click events, we have on click, it says list is empty. And this is just in the default state of the button 01, this one right here, right? I need to make an action happen. And what I want to do is I want to call my camera. I want to call the animator that's associated with my camera. And the function I want to do is say, hey, play that parameter I set up, cam01, right? When on click. So on click, what are we going to do? Well, let's go ahead and set this up, right? We're going to add a function here. So we're going to say, what's the object you want to control, right? Oh, I want to control my main camera. And what do you want to do? What's the function you want to give your camera? Well, I want to control its animator. Well, if we open that up, we should see, okay, it's got an animator listed here because we set an animator up for main camera. So we go to animator, and we've got all these different things we can do inside our animator in here. A lot of this doesn't really apply to what we're doing now, but what does apply is that string value that we want to access, right? We want to set the trigger we set up, to the string value. Okay, so set trigger, remember how we created those triggers, cam01, cam02, cam03, and reset, right? We want to set the trigger of this animator to that camera, that animation value. So I'm going to say set trigger. So what I did was I said, hey, I'm going to access my camera, and then I'm going to access the animator, and then we're going to set the trigger of the animator to cam01. And that is in direct reflection of, if we look at our camera and we go to our animator, direct reflection of this right here. I'm just calling that. And basically, when I set that function, all it does is do this, right? By code, basically, right? It's saying, hey, when that's clicked, turn that on. That's what it's doing, right? So I'm going to go to my scene value, and let's go ahead and just test it out really quickly because we have it set up. Click on the button real quick, make sure everything's good. Go to on click, we're accessing our camera. We're saying access the animator, set the trigger to cam01. That's on click, so that means once it's clicked, right? I go play. If I click this button, it should play cam01. There we go, right? Clicked it, cam01, right? Now we're going to do the same thing to button 2. I'm going to go to button 2 canvas. In here, I'm going to make an action. I want to say, hey, let's go ahead and access our camera. Let's access the animator of our camera, and we will set the trigger to cam02. Same thing for button 03. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to set an event, grab my camera, link it, go to the animator, say set trigger string cam03. Okay. And the last one for the reset button, same thing. I'm going to say let's create an action, and let's go ahead and access our main camera again, access its animator, and we'll set the trigger. Set trigger, where's it at? Set trigger to reset, which was I think the last value we created, right? So now when I play it, I can look at click 01, I'll play the first animation. When I get to my spot, I can click 02, play the animation. I click 03, play the animation. And then, oh, I gotta move my button so I can see it. But that reset button, let's go ahead and move that where I can see it, which, let's put it right there. I think I can see it there, let's see. Go ahead and play this again. Play button 01, and because these are active, I could just click them and just play through, all right? If I wanted to, I could actually just play through really quickly. There you go, I'm at reset. If I click reset, there you go, it starts over. And the reason it snapped back to the front was because I set the transition between that last transition element to like no blend, which is literally like start at the next animation. If I set a blend on there, it would try to zoom back really quickly and it would look kind of weird, right? So we have that set up, but the interesting thing is, you know, these are kind of set. Oh, here, let's go ahead and restart this really quickly. That actually, let's play. It looks kind of weird having those open as you click them. I'd rather have them like kind of disappear after you know, have some feeling of, oh, I've activated these every time I click them, right? So to do so, there's a couple things we can do. One, we can turn it off, and two, we could put another UI element that's just an animated pop element or something like that in its place and just have that play, instantiate and play when that one's turned off. So you get that feeling of you activated something, right? So to do that, on button 01, if I go to my button 01 button, and exactly where these on-click elements are right here, instead of accessing the main camera, we'll keep that there, but let's go ahead and add another event to this on-click. So the cool thing about, like I said before, in Unity, you can add as many of these events as you want to click states, as many as you want. Like when something's clicked, you can have all kinds of things fire off, like to your heart's content. You can really go nuts, right? But for this, you know, we're just gonna do some simple stuff. So we wanna turn this button off after it's clicked, right? So it doesn't exist after it's clicked. Now to do so, all we have to do is reference ourself, right? So I say, hey, button 01 canvas, right? Let's go ahead and turn that off. So to do that, I'm going to reference the button 01 canvas, and then after it's clicked, let's give it a function to turn it off. So if I go to game object, because we're referencing a game object, and to turn it off, it's in the game object settings. So in here, I'm going to say, let's go to its active state. Is it active or is it not? So we go to set active. And this little checkbox it gives us under set active directly coincides with this little checkbox at the top. Lets us know if it's active or inactive, right? So right here, we want it inactive. So we're just going to leave that unchecked. If it's checked, that means it'll show it. If it's unchecked, that means it won't show it. So because we're on button 01 and we want to turn it off as we've activated it, we're going to head and turn it off, right? We're going to say, hey, on click, turn the canvas off, right? So now, let's play it. If I click button 01, it should disappear. Oh, see, it disappears. Now we go to button 02, right? We can do the same thing to button 02. Button 02, we can say on the button, let's make another event. We'll just reference button 02 canvas, and we'll say, hey, let's change its active state to off, right? We go to button 03, same thing. We'll just grab the button 03 canvas. We'll say, you know what, game object, set active. We'll make sure that's off, right? Same with reset. A reset we probably don't really need to worry about because you don't really see it after it's done, so we'll leave that for now. So let's just check this out, right? If I play this, these should turn off after they're clicked. So button 01 disappears. Button 02 disappears. All right. Button 03 disappears. And reset. I don't care because we just zoom back to the beginning anyways, right? So kind of nice to have that. Now, one of the things you could do also is attach like a reset button to the feet. Now, we don't have a VR controller associated with this, but what we did in a lot of our VR demos is once we set up like a reset button or something like that, we duplicated it and just attached it to the player at their feet. So if they just wanted to reset, they could just look down at any time and reset too. So you can do that kind of stuff too. You can reuse things as you create them. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, that's great that they turn off after they've looked at it, but I also just want one button visible at any time, so they're not trying to look at button 02 or button 03 when the scenario starts, right? And that's as easy as kind of doing the reverse as what we just did where we turn them off when it comes on. We can kind of just come in and do the reverse and say, you know what? When this thing starts, I'm just going to go ahead and take these first three right here, and I'm going to turn their visibility off, right? They're still in my scene, they're just not visible, right? But what I can say is just the same, just do it the reverse. Go into my button here, let's add another event, and let's say, hey, once you're clicked, let's turn button 02 on, right? So I can just drag button 02 into this next one and say, hey, your game object state, let's set you to on, right? So now, if I play, if I click button, you can look at my hierarchy right here to see what happens, right? When I click button 02, it turns button 02 on, right? I do the same thing to the button 02 canvas. I can say, hey, on your button, let's go ahead in here and let's turn button 03 on. Game object set active will turn you on when button 02 is clicked, right? So now we kind of get this turn off, turn on scenario, right? So we got button 01. Now, okay, now I know where I'm going. I'm going to button 02. I look at that one. That one turns off. Okay, now I'm going to button 03 somewhere. There that one is. I'll just turn off and take me to reset, which disappeared for some reason. Oh, because I turned it off, right? So on button 03, we need to do the same thing. Turn on, reset at the end, right? So we'll say, hey, game object, set active, go on. Right, so just to test that again, button 01, go here, button 02, go here, button 03, great, and the reset button. So they can't really mess up, you know what I mean? They're not going to do things that you're kind of coordinating how they go in this VR narrative that whatever experience you're trying to do. When you set up that turn off, turn on scenario, the user knows that, oh, okay, I'm just going to look at this one, then go to the next one, then the next one. It's very linear, right? Now you could go away from that and go non-linear and do all kinds of crazy stuff, have options, do all kinds of stuff as you go around your level, turn things on and off and go crazy. But for now, this is good, right? This is just a linear kind of basic transition through a level. In one of the demos another student did, he had, where you go in one room, you can change the lighting of things. So he had like red, green, and purple. And you could look at those and he would actually change the lights to different lights inside a room depending on which one you looked at, you know. Things like that you could get into. So there's a lot of, if you want to turn the lights on or off or change the sky or whatever, you could have buttons that change those kind of things around your scene as well.
Kind of triggers.
Triggers that do all kinds of stuff. You could just go nuts, you know what I mean? Spawn a character that comes in and talks to you, or whatever. You know what I mean? You could really go crazy. But you can see just from that alone, right? That's just a very simple, really high level kind of first foray into what triggers do into Unity. But just with that alone, you could accomplish so much. I mean, I can't tell you how many demos, even clients that I do stuff for, that they're like, you know what, like an advertising firm, they just want a VR demo that goes from point A to point B to point C, and the user can't click anything. A lot of times it's at a convention where they don't want them using wands or something. They just want them to look at stuff, and that's it. Put the headset on, take it off, next person, right? And you just give them those basic things to do, but you make something cool out of that, right? You can do a lot of cool stuff with just like 4 or 5 basic triggers, but if you have them do really cool stuff, then it's cool. All of a sudden becomes much cooler. You could do path-oriented stuff. Choose this path, choose that path, choose your own adventure type stuff. There's all kinds of stuff you could do with just this type of scenario right here. So think about that in your guys' VR narratives. Again, I recorded this, so I'll throw this online so you guys have access to it. And I'm also going to save this project and upload it so you can download it and see exactly how I set that up as well. Okay? Or even if you want to reuse it, that's fine too. I don't care. As long as you do something with it and make it your own and original, that's good. So get cracking on your projects. I think that was pretty good. Recap on how to do these transitions. Hopefully this helps you out, and we'll get going on those projects. All right, guys?